First of all, hello, and thank you for joining us for a discussion on creating and sustaining motivation in engineering teams. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Skyscanner. And the webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the motivation channel. So let's get started with some introductions. I am Maria Gutierrez. I'm Senior Director of Engineering at Intercom. And today I'll be joined by a fantastic group of engineering leaders, Erica Chestnut, who is Head of QA at Calendly, Ian Nolan, SVP of Core Engineering at Datadog, Usman Ismail, who is Senior Engineering Manager at Bolt, and Chris Jen, Senior Engineering Manager at Skyscanner. Together, we are going to talk about what it takes to build engaged and motivated teams so that we can deliver better business results and create healthier environments at work. So let's get started, first of all, by getting to know our panelists a little bit better. Let's hear about their backgrounds and why is this topic top of mind for all of them. How about we start with you, Erica?
Thank you. I'm Erica. As Maria mentioned, I'm head of QA at Calendly. I've been there for a little over 2 years. I have a software development background and moved into quality after I guess complained about quality a little too much as a developer. And I have a passion for building teams and process and organization. I'm especially interested in this topic from a quality standpoint, especially because motivated teams are the ones that are engaged and they're taking that next step to ensure high quality. So having a motivated engineering team is very important for me in my role.
Perfect. Thank you so much and welcome. How about you, Ian?
Hi, my name is Ian Nolan. So I'm an SVP of engineering at Datadog. I manage an organization of about 350 people. So I have a pure software development background. I've been in the industry about 21 years. The last decade, though, I've been managing. So the first half was managing engineers. The last half has really been coaching and managing managers and trying to help them grow. I find this topic really, really interesting because I find often for like the first 2 years or so of a manager's career, understanding different people's motivations and actually changing their techniques, not just assuming like themselves, that's a big stepping stone in sort of a manager's career. And so I'm really happy to talk about what I've learned and learn from the others on the panel.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Usman?
Yeah, hi. As Maria mentioned that I'm a senior engineering manager at Bolt. I have about 10 and a bit years of experience at various companies, big and small. I worked at Amazon, EA for a while, and then a few startups, one called Kick, which is in this messaging space, and Simple, which is a fintech company. I sort of recently started managing managers. I've been sort of a manager for about 3 years, and I'm really interested in motivation and bringing a more structured and repeatable perspective to it. So what are sort of some of the patterns that we can consistently use to keep our teams motivated?
Perfect. Welcome. Chris, your last.
I'm Chris Gent. I'm a senior engineering manager here at Skyscanner, where I've been almost 5 years now. I spent most of that time working in our data platform teams, helping shape that. But more recently, I'm focused on our marketing platforms. Before Skyscanner, I used to work in ad tech, where I worked for Yahoo for 8 years. And that's where I made the move across from being an individual contributor over to the engineering leadership track. Why this topic is particularly interesting to me is more recently, I've been very involved in helping grow and scale out different teams within Skyscanner. And I think setting teams up to be highly motivated and engaged is just super important. It just sets you off in the right direction.
Perfect. We have, as you've heard, a wide range of roles and experiences. I'm personally really looking forward to learning from you all about this topic. from what you're all saying, there is a clear correlation between motivation and the engagement of employees. And a strong engagement is known to translate to better results, to growth, and to retention of talent, and the ability to hire more successfully as well. There is a popular quote, and I think it's been said in many different ways, but it roughly fits into people work for people, not for businesses. And therefore, a critical aspect of our roles, as you were saying, Chris, as managers and organizational leaders, is motivating our teams to do great work through communicating either a clear purpose or through valuing their efforts. There's obviously a lot to unpack here, but I would really like to get started by understanding what we mean when we talk about highly motivated employees. So how about we start with you, Ian? What does a highly motivated organization look like for you?
Yeah, I think like from afar, it's very, very easy to say that it's an organization of motivated individuals. But when you sort of break it down, what you find is, managers often have to attack this problem from a bunch of different levels. And so what I found is, like, the first level is the individual, understanding the people on your team, making sure they're happy in their day-to-day. And there's a lot of just like personal one-on-one stuff you get through that. But then beyond that, often, like, again, these are personal motivations that you have to approach differently. Like, a lot of people are extremely motivated by the team they're on. They're extremely motivated by the social aspect, by the feeling that they're doing something with their team. And so a second aspect where managers have to spend a lot of time is sort of how the team is motivated. Does it feel like a team that has a lot of energy? The third part of that then I sort of call like the organizational motivation, which is sort of like this mission motivation. And again, it's a different way of approaching the problem, where really the team can really, the team might be very happy, but do they understand where they fit with the company? And so it's another place where a manager really has to invest and have an organization which really is motivated in its mission. And so, yeah, it all comes down to the individuals, but I find it's very, very different aspects of approaching the problem.
I love that framing, and I would like us to discuss those three levels in more detail through the session today. But before we do, one thing that I'm really curious to hear from you all is the flip side of motivation. When do we know we have a problem related to motivation? And Usman, for example, what do you think are the failure modes here?
So I think the biggest failure mode that indicates a problem in motivation is sort of disengagement and sort of lack of ownership over the day-to-day work. And I've seen teams get into that mode where they're in the order-taking mode. They don't sort of drive themselves to impact. And that's like a sure sign that they either don't understand or don't align fully with the broader goals of the organization. And the alignment often drives to motivation. And one interesting sort of caveat to analyze this, a lot of people assume burnout can come from too much work, but a really big cause of burnout can often be a lack of motivation. So if you're doing things that you're not passionate about, that you don't believe in, that leads to burnout much faster, whereas a similar level of workload can be sustained, and you'll have a lot more resilience if you are motivated to work on the delivery of what you're working on.
And that obviously starts impacting kind of the performance and their ability to do their job. But I've personally, and I'm glad that you've raised the too much work can lead to burnout. And I feel that the opposite can also be true. And Erica, I'm curious to hear how do you feel about, can too much motivation lead to similar failure modes to what Usman was describing?
Yeah, absolutely. You have your top performers, your people that are the go-getters, and they're in everything, and it creates a similar response, because as leaders, we look to these people. They are top performers for a reason, and we're going to them and giving them the special projects, and we're asking them for help, and they're the people that the team members go to, and they wind up they're overwhelmed. And then they struggle because they naturally are driven. They naturally want to go out there and accomplish these things, and they want to support people. And in the midst of that, they're not taking care of themselves, and they wind up burnt out and then demotivated because of it. So yeah, it definitely can sit on the other side of that equation as well. You have people that are charging after things and then now they're tired.
So we should be looking out for both those people that are maybe more demotivated and disengaged, but we should not forget that maybe there is a problem at the other spectrum, and you can go from high motivation to like being completely out of being able to perform as well. And I have seen that in the past, so it's definitely something to watch out for. Let's go back then to what Ian was mentioning, kind of the three levels of motivation. And let's first focus on individual motivation, because I think that's quite a meaty part of what we are talking about. What is, Usman, important for managers to consider when it comes to individual needs and preferences?
The best framework that I have run into with regards to this is by a guy called Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called Drive, and he talks about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations and their relationship to the kind of work our teams are going to be doing. So extrinsic motivations, as you can imagine, are external to yourself. They can be in the form of baseline rewards. So you get paid to do your job, and you will get this baseline reward as long as you continue to do your job. These often come up as hygiene factors. So not having enough of a baseline reward will keep you distracted and unmotivated, but there's very quick diminishing returns to scale. Like the additional few thousand of dollars or pounds a year is not going to translate into linear growth in motivation. And sort of you can think about it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As long as that need is met, it sort of goes into the background. The next sort of level up is if-then reward. So you can think of it as your annual bonus or like a performance bonus. These are short-term motivational, but it's often been shown that they don't have long-term impacts because it frames this frames your work in transactional terms. If you do this, you will get this, which really just takes out a lot of joy out of it. It can really, people get into a career because they really enjoy that, and making it so transactional can sort of undermine that a little bit. And then sort of the last level that people often set is goals. Like, here's a goal, and it feels really nice to achieve goals. But I think as anybody who follows pop psychology knows, we will automatically set future goals for ourselves when you're about to achieve some goals. It never gives you lasting sort of happiness, contentment to achieve goals, because your brain is always switching them out for you. Also, sort of too much focus in goals can lead to unethical behavior and just sort of short-term optimization. As opposed to this, what Daniel Pink sort of highlights as intrinsic motivators are the opportunity for mastery, to get really good at your craft and have some focused time as software developers to do that. The autonomy to be given a challenge and be able to figure out how you solve that challenge yourself rather than being sort of directed in your day-to-day. And then as sort of Ian, I think, alluded to, purpose. Having alignment between your purpose and your organization's purpose, so you feel what you're doing has a long-term value beyond just sort of the increments that you hand over every week. You're still muted, Maria.
Sorry, we're going to talk, thank you. We're going to talk more about purpose later on, because I think that's another area that is super important and a big role for us to play. But before we do, I'd like to go a little bit deeper on those kind of extrinsic motivators. And something that is very, very top of mind, and I personally, as an engineering leader and manager, have faced a lot of time, is that relationship between compensation and motivation. And as you said before, like there's a baseline, and it's not necessarily what, once we meet a specific requirements, might not be more of a motivator. But from my experience, if it's not done properly, it can be a huge demotivator. So Ian, what has been your experience, and how do you as a leader approach that to make sure that something like that cannot undermine all the other amazing work that you're doing to motivate your team?
Yeah, my experience is very similar to yours, Maria, which is compensation. Again, people, a little extra money is going to make a big difference, particularly at this point in software development, where I think we know we're compensated. But people really, really care about fairness. And what you run into is that not only do they care about fairness, they care about the appearances of fairness. And that's often a much harder problem. That a system can be very, very fair, but if it doesn't appear to be fair in their personal anecdotes, then you have someone who can be just as upset and just as demotivated by it. And so, and this is particularly difficult, I think, in management, because there's a number of reasons why a strict notion of fairness is very, very difficult, right? You have different job families, you have different levels within those job families, you have different locations around the world where you don't want to give people golden handcuffs necessarily by overpaying them. But then that leads to unfairness. People doing the same job might just be paid different by locations. I think this is an area where, especially as you get more senior in management, you put a lot of time into processes. It's why like leveling matrices and things like that are absolutely so important, because these are the appearances. This is the visible sign that everyone sees about what is fair. Now, for people more earlier in their career, often when you have a lot less control over these, the biggest thing is to just understand the system, understand the data as much as you can. Like, you are going to be in one-on-ones and being asked to justify something. And if you don't, like, it might be you might disagree with, and that always gets into how much you should say what's right for the company or not. But you don't want to be in a situation where you don't really understand why this has come out a certain way in front of someone who's very upset that it is. So it's a constant investment in both getting these processes and systems as fair as they can, but also understanding them as well.
Yeah, and one rule of thumb for myself personally is like whether salaries are open or not, and there's different people that have different opinions about that, is inevitable, and it is okay that people are going to talk about that. So even if you don't make them public, also my rule of thumb is, if these got out, would I feel like I can justify the decisions? And as long as I can go to sleep thinking that I have a way to, you know, rationally kind of justify, is definitely something that it's easy as you go to a new team or a new organization to find some of those areas that don't feel potentially quite right. And I think it's such a critical part of our job for that reason, because a little kind of inconsistency can damage so much the motivation of individuals, and fairness is critical in this regard.
Maria, because it's like, I imagine myself looking someone in the eye when I've got to make a hard decision, right? Where it's like, if I don't go above bands, we're not going to get this. But I imagine myself looking someone else in the eye and having to say, here's why it made sense. And you can't just say, well, they got a better offer from Facebook. Like that is a bad reason. So it's a good sort of mechanism to force the right decision.
Yeah, and those decisions have side effects when you don't do them as part of a process or a system. So absolutely. Erica, the other aspect, I'm curious to understand what works best for you when it comes to understanding your team members' individuals' motivation, because that's something very personal, and it might be very, very different from person to person in your team. What has worked well for you?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It is very different from person to person, in my opinion, and that for us, we work to make sure that people are doing the right jobs. And especially one of the things that I love to say is, you know, are your passions fed? And let's find ways that your passions are fed. You know, we're asking culture questions, right? Like, what's your favorite thing to do? What is your superpower? And we do that in the interview, and we have people saying things like, well, I'm great at woodworking, you know? So we're looking to understand the person, the whole person, and what excites them, and work to blend that into their day. And no, we can't do woodworking necessarily in Calendly, but what about it is exciting to them? Is it that they like to be heads down working on something, or are they a more social person that likes to engage? Do they do a lot of volunteering and they like to help and serve others? What is it about them that motivates their in their personal life, and how can we support that in their day-to-day work? You know, somebody that is a volunteer or likes to be more social might prefer a role where, you know, from a quality perspective, where they're engaging, they have high engagement with a particular team. They might be working on a marketing team that has a lot of interaction, social interaction especially. That might excite them, whereas somebody else is like, I just need my headphones on and I need to work heads down. They might want to work on more technical or siloed projects and then deliver something out. So, and we're doing that with, like I said, we start at the interview process and the type of questions that we ask. In our onboarding, social events that we have, one-on-ones, Slack messages, it's a mandate for our leadership team that we're looking at these people and understanding who they are, and then making sure that we're tailoring the opportunities that we're positioning for them within the company in ways that their passions are fed, which is going to motivate them.
It's so critical to really have that insight so you can, tie the dots and put people in the right path and the right place. How about you, Chris? Any tips from you on that?
Yeah, just to layer onto that, a couple of thoughts. The first one is this one goes into being very intentional about understanding how your team's motivation sits, and it's something that we've been using with quite good effect recently within Skyscanner, and that's the concept of what's known as stay interviews. And they're kind of like exit interviews, but you actually do them before your team members think about leaving. So it's much more proactive, and you get the chance to actually fix things in place before it's too late. And they're a very candid conversation. So you can Google kind of like suggested questions and topics for these things, but I would advise take a personal approach. You know your team better than anyone, so you judge the questions to ask and put them in the right place. Yeah, by doing this in a very candid way, you get to quickly understand the individual motivators, and actually probably more importantly, the demotivators for people. What about someone's day-to-day job is turning them off? What don't they enjoy turning up to work to do? And what we find is actually by just having that really candid conversation and that knowledge, you can actually, as a manager, make relatively easy changes sometimes to what you're doing, which actually set people up for a much more successful time in the team. So that could be something around giving much clearer career guidance, setting expectations on what different levels in the career mean, assigning new projects as you see opportunities come up, giving people extra initiatives potentially outside their normal team scope. And also in some cases, it's the right thing to do to think about rotations. Is this person in the right team? Should they be moving somewhere else? Would they be better suited in a different team? Or a final one would be helping set up a mentorship. Does this person need a more direct mentoring to help them with their career? A second technique that comes to mind is it's much less direct. So indirectly observing whether your teams and the individuals in those teams are acting like the owner. I think Usman mentioned this earlier when we look at what does it mean to have a motivated team. If your team and the individuals in it are not being creative, they're not pushing to hit their own targets, they're not driving projects forward, then that's a strong signal that you need to go and investigate why that's the case. Have you set that team up with the right environment to sort of be successful and build up their motivation? Perhaps as a manager, you need to go in and make some changes to set them up so they can bring that success.
No, that's great. One exercise to add to that works really well for me, especially as I'm building a new relationship with somebody, is kind of do their journey, and they can decide at what point in their career or studies or whatever they want to start, but walk through all those different changes and why did they go there, why did they decided to leave, and really start to flesh out. You can quickly see the patterns and the things that really excite them and why they took opportunities and the things that made them move on from those things or what made them not so happy. And I've always found it super insightful to really get to know people a little bit better. I also love, Chris, what you said about intentional, because for me, intentional leadership is the key word. Anything that I talk about leadership is that being always have a purpose. I'm mindful about what you are doing. So I love that you use that word there.
I was going to say, when we do this, we set the conversation up beforehand by deliberately saying this is the purpose of this conversation. So it allows the team member to kind of go into it with the right frame of mind. It's not a surprise.
No, that's great. Let's move then. So we've covered individual motivation. Let's move into that team and peer kind of motivation aspect, that second pillar that Ian was talking at the beginning. Usman, what role do peers play in keeping individuals motivated? What do you think?
No, that's a very interesting question. And again, going back to that theme of being more structured about it, it was something I struggled with early on, because it can seem like most people, when they become managers, are managing a team that they used to work on. So you're with your friends. It seems like, all you need is random chatter, but there is sort of some interesting thing going on beneath the scenes at much stronger teams. And it breaks down into, for me, two things. One is psychological safety. The thing you need from your team is the freedom to make mistakes and for that not to be catastrophic or socially embarrassing. And I'll actually sort of quote Astro Teller, who leads the Google X division, like the moonshot division at Google. And he structures his team to celebrate failure. They actually have a monthly meeting where people present their biggest and most sort of catastrophic failure and then mention what they learned from that, because that second step will make the difference between a weak but sort of motivated team to like a very, very strong motivated team where they are free to experiment and they are free to fail, but as long as they have this mindset of learning from those failures and having support from their team. And then the flip side of that is, and again, I'll quote somebody from, quote somebody who knows a lot more about this than I do, Patty McCord, who was the HR, like the head of HR for Netflix all throughout its early journey. And she basically wrote the famous Netflix culture deck in collaboration with Reed Hastings. And she mentions that your other peers are actually the biggest perk. One of the strongest things people want to do at an organization is be challenged, be working with smart people who they will learn from. And that is actually really, even after they're hired, a really big component of being motivated is feeling like you're in a team that is a high performance team. And that if you were to let your standards go, your peers would sort of let you know and will point it out. It's not somewhere that, mediocrity is tolerated. And even in my personal career, one of the teams that I enjoyed managing the most is because I had two senior software engineers who could really hold my toes to the fire. They would not let me step on anything. And that is the most sort of interesting place to be as a manager, where you are challenged day in, day out to, keep up with your team as opposed to just sort of talking down to them.
They're watching you, which is great, because that's how you how you keep on growing. But this really resonates with me, because especially peer support, I find this is obviously super important at all levels, but I found it especially critical as I've become more senior. So I'm wondering, how do you kind of rely, Chris, on your peers, and how does it impact your own motivation?
Yeah, this is that's an interesting topic for me. So I think in the last year, particularly, as we've kind of moved into the remote working era, where you don't have your colleagues immediately around you, you don't have those water cooler moments so much anymore. But as a leader in an organization, you really depend on the support of your peers much more than ever before. Being able to find a group where you can candidly share your challenges, learn from each other, bounce ideas off other people. It just helps you reduce those feelings of imposter syndrome that I know everyone suffers from sometimes. And at all levels, we continue to learn from our peers and others. So I would encourage everyone to find your peer team, even if it's not in your direct project team. There are people in similar roles as you in the organization. But in a more practical sense, I think that these kinds of relationships, they're also the main catalyst to being able to get stuff done, and making sure that your teams are working on the right things and doing it in the right way. There's no point in investing in one of your teams building horse-drawn carts if your colleagues have already invented Tesla somewhere else in the business. So part of your role is to stop that kind of thing happening. I guess the conclusion would be that I like to use my peers to help keep me on track, and they keep me on track as well. I get feedback about that. And they just help you feeling like you're not in an echo chamber as a leader. Often as a leader, you're kind of sitting on top of teams of people. You have somewhat less interactions on a day-to-day level with what's going on in the team. And by having your peers around you, you help get that sense of, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing a good job here? And you get that by bouncing it off your peers.
Absolutely, and you can really confide on them. Like sometimes we're dealing with tricky situations that you absolutely should not try to solve it by yourself, and you should have a little bit of a kind of somebody to bounce kind of your thoughts with, that understand kind of that level of complexity as well. And what I find as well is like a lot of time with more senior positions, kind of our managers, they are looking after other bigger problems, which is they might be dealing with boards or other things rather than kind of be able to provide that direct feedback. So as you said, I also rely a lot on the feedback from my peers to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. Erica, one interesting thing about team and peers is when we get a little bit into conflicts. So what happens? What do we do when there is a conflict between an individual's preferences or ambitions and what needs to be done by the team or what another peer wants? Do you have some tips on that?
Yeah, I learned from a well-respected leader years ago the mantra of right seat, right bus, right people. And I've carried that with me in my career because it's led to things like make sure your passions are fed. Do you have, is the person in the right seat? Are they really enjoying? Are they motivated by their job or in their job? Is this the right seat for them? And if it's not, let's evaluate that. Are they asking for something different? I have people that are saying, hey, I'm really interested in Agile. I lean into coaching for Agile. I think I want to be an Agile coach. Are you in the right seat any longer? What does that look like? What is the need? But also for the organization, what is the need for the organization? And making sure that we're getting aligned. So again, right seat, right bus, right person. And if it's not, we need to have those candid conversations. I believe we should, be upfront, both individual contributor and manager and organization. What is it that we need? And can we create a space for what we all want and all need? And if not, how can I work with you and leverage my network to find the right place for you if it's no longer here? Can we, lean across the aisle into another department? Is there space for you that makes sense there where you can flourish because it's something that you're passionate about and you're going to be even more motivated? So just making sure that we're looking for those opportunities and not boxing people in because this is the job that they were hired into and that we thought was the right fit, or not recognizing that the needs of the organization have changed and it does not mean that we need to release people and hire new ones. How can we be creative with the people that we have hired because we've said that they were a great fit into the organization and honor them that way, as well as the needs of the organization? So right people, right seat, right bus.
I love that framing, and like building that trust is so critical here. But sometimes it's also a compromise, right? What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, so I totally agree with what Erica said to start with. The only thing I might add is maybe right time is sometimes a factor for some teams where the work changes over time. You see this a lot in software development where, someone, they become an expert on what they're working on. They really want to start a new project and it's just not the right time for the team. And often they approach you as like, well, I really want to transfer to a different team. And sometimes that is the right decision. That is the best opportunity. It's the best thing for the company. Sometimes though, if you can ask them to just wait 6 months, that project does have to happen on your own team. And what you find, because there are multiple motivations, that there's that growth motivation, but there is the team motivation, there is the sense of purpose motivation. You can ask people to wait and often ask for a bit of patience. The big caveat to all this is like, be very, very careful with your promises. I don't think there's anything much more demotivating than a manager you don't trust, even if they made a promise with good intentions. It's just like, well, I can't believe the world anymore. But I have found over time, again, if you are very confident 6 months from now that they will get what they want, you can ask for 6 months. And people, again, people want to be liked by their team, and like that's a big part of motivation for them. And so it's a good technique sometimes as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, but we always need to be careful with our promises because there's never that certainty. Let's move into the other big topic was purpose, because I think that's maybe the one that we relate a lot more to motivation. When, Usman, do you know as a leader that you need to spend more time in clarifying kind of the purpose, the vision, and the mission of your team or your company?
Sorry.
You're mute.
Yeah,
There you
Chris.
go.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Chris touched on this a little bit earlier, and I'll sort of reiterate that. And one of the sort of descriptions of a management's role is sort of described as herding cats, and it can be that difficult. But the important part of that is herding. If you find yourself being very directive, if you find yourself sort of being a taskmaster, essentially, that's definitely a failure mode and an indication that your reports, your engineers are looking to you for too much direction on what they're supposed to be doing. And ideally, you'd want them to exercise the autonomy to drive those processes, drive those outcomes themselves. And you can be sort of giving high-level goals, giving high-level views or frameworks on how to value certain priorities over others, but you shouldn't be necessarily the one making those final sort of on-the-ground decisions. And again, going back to Patty McCord from Netflix, she frames this in terms of a view from the C-suite. If every single employee doesn't understand your business's fundamental values and how they make decisions, there's a problem, because it's really hard to give a set of instructions to someone that can be followed literally to good outcomes. As software developers, that's what we spend our lives doing. And if it was that easy, we would have done it already. It's a lot easier to point them in the right direction and instill, or easier or not, but point them in the right direction and instill the right culture and instill the right values, and then let them run with it. And if that's not happening, that's an indication that they don't understand purpose. And one sort of interesting thing that I've sort of started to learn is that getting somebody to a purpose is a discovery process. You have to discover their purpose as opposed to instill a purpose. There's a little bit of what you can do with charisma and sort of being a good leadership to instill vision. But at the end of the day, people will have their own values. And if they don't fundamentally align with your team's values or your company's values, that isn't a moral judgment. It could just be not a fit. So if somebody's really looking to, for example, increase the sort of state of the art in a certain area, that's a very different motivation from somebody who's looking to help people in need. Like those are and the same company, the same team will probably not be able to address both of them. So sometimes, when you discover those needs and have those difficult conversations, it might lead to somebody leaving, but that's still, I think, a better overall outcome than trying to sort of fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Erica? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with, you get when your team is requiring so much of you that you as a leader are becoming a taskmaster or a micromanager is a great indicator for when they're not going in the same direction. It's also looking at the outcomes of what they're doing. If they're not coming to you, but the outcomes are different across the team, it means they're not aligned under that same North Star or those core values. They don't understand, like Usman said, those core values of the organization and what direction the organization is trying to go. For me at Calendly, this is the first place that I've been at that we speak so much about our core values. It's embedded very deeply into the culture. It's very surprising, and I've never seen anything like it in any organization where we hold each other accountable to those core values. And so when we're talking about the direction we're going, we're questioning, does it align with these core values? And if it doesn't, we're holding ourselves accountable to that. And then each of the teams has the direction or their North Star for quality. We have our North Star and it aligns with those core values. So having that consistent messaging, and when we're off track, being able to see that, leaders looking out for that, and then bringing the team back in and saying, hey, let's get us all on the same page to make sure we're going in the right direction. And that keeps people motivated because they know what they're doing. They know what their purpose is, what they're reaching for. And if even if their head's down, they can look up and say, oh, that's right. This is why we're doing this. And this is why I'm engaged and what my value is in this space.
when it comes to mission, vision, and values, you can't over communicate. It's so critical that you put those guardrails and that they are clear to everybody. But there's a question I just saw in the Q&A that relates to something that I'm very curious to discuss with Chris, because it's very specific to this times, but it can be applied to other things. And is the fact that, you know, what motivates individuals is not static. It can change due to their growth and the context, kind of their experiences at work or at home. So, you know, things change. And just because we think we know somebody and what they need, it doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. But this year has been a particularly jarring one. Hopefully you all agree with me, for many businesses when it comes to kind of communicating their purpose and their position and their health. And for you, Chris, kind of the travel industry is being one of the industries that has been more impacted, obviously, by the pandemic and the changes, and you've had to adapt to a completely new world pretty much overnight. How do you manage this change as an organizational leader, and how, you know, what do you do when things go absolutely not to plan? Because I'm sure nobody at Skyscanner was expecting that you were going to have to be dealing with this exactly a year ago.
Yep, it would be very true to say we weren't expecting it as an organization. I don't think it was in any of the plans. And it is also true to say that the last year has been quite disruptive for the business. And I think it's really interesting how this links to that sense of purpose and how purpose links to motivation. So in such adversity, then we being realistic, we're not going to be chasing massive revenue growth or user growth during this period. So we have to turn our purpose to what is actually within our control. At the company level, that meant focusing on one of our core values, which is around being traveler first, we call it, so user first. And one of the things we did was we built out some new products to support people that were still traveling. And one of those was around providing travel restrictions information in a sort of country to country type of way. You can see exactly what the restrictions are if you want to go from country A to country B. But by setting up that project, the motivational shift we saw in the teams there was huge, actually, and the team was super enthusiastic about it, just largely down to the fact that there was this sense of purpose. We're doing something that can help our users. And for me, that was a really awesome example of how linking a purpose directly to the work people are doing in a team can have that impact. And I should point at the more individual level, when some of the fundamentals of the business shift in a disruptive way, then something that we can also focus on is just reiterating some of the fundamentals that remain the same, actually. So we have the same great colleagues in the business that we can learn off. We have the same chances to develop new skills. We have, and it's also true, actually, when organizational changes happen, perhaps you see colleagues departing the business, that actually gives rise to opportunities to accelerate the growth of individuals if people want to take those chances and take extra responsibility. It's actually an opportunity. So you kind of see opportunities out of some adversity there.
And that really resonates, and it's something I've experienced in the past as well, that sometimes kind of those dramatic changes actually create a lot of opportunities for people. One thing that I'm curious to hear, and I think, Usman, you were talking about charisma earlier on, but like I find that inspiring confidence and communicating to motivate are definitely skills kind of that we need, key skills for leaders. What aspects, Ian, of your day-to-day work require you to demonstrate, for example, those skills?
So I think when you get to very senior in management, what you do, like, so Eric used the term North Star, which I think is really, really important. But what I find is throughout the layers of a hierarchy, it's this job of like creating a story of how you attach to the North Star. And so I always go back to my very, very first job. I had a team that was called EC2 Network Monitoring. And I remember saying to my mentor, I wouldn't want to join this team. I don't like its mission. And he said, well, you have to fix that. And so what it means is creating a narrative is both creating a story, but sometimes it is then going throughout the organization and changing the mission of your team such that it is something that gives people purpose. And so I think that's the sort of the way to do this throughout the day.
Perfect. We are almost out of time, and I was curious to hear, maybe we can hear from one of you kind of more on a growth-related question. How do you personally invest in improving your leadership presence and communication skills whilst being your authentic self is still? Chris, maybe you want to take this one.
Yeah. Touch on this quickly. For me, what I like to do is actually look around my organization or outside my organization and observe behaviors of peer managers or leaders in other organizations and really see what are they doing that I sort of can take something from and sort of put my own spin on it, and then open that out into my own forms of communication and leadership. I think if we look around, we'll see examples where we think that that's a great example of someone leading a presentation or someone leading a group meeting or even sending an email. You see some emails and they really resonate with you in terms of their style.
Yeah, maybe you can all later on in a Slack give us a little bit pick. I'm always curious to hear how different people approach this. But it's evident from kind of the conversation we've just had that there is a lot we can do as managers to help our teams to get the most out of their work, and as a result, obviously, have the biggest impact possible in the business through both delivering results, but also through building a supporting and healthy environment for everybody. We can definitely influence their excitement, but we are also more critically responsible for individualizing our approach and not neglecting the basics, which is psychological safety, kind of our compensation, kind of treatment, fairness, and like in days like today, kind of their mental health support and create an environment where people are well taken care of. I have absolutely loved hearing from all your experiences, so thank you so much to our panelists for all the good insights. And we'll be taking questions. I know there's a few questions in here in the channel, but let's move them to the Slack channel, which is motivation channel, so that our panelists can answer those in there, because there's some interesting ones. So thank you everybody for joining, and hope you can join us in Slack. The channel again is motivation. Thank you so much everybody. Bye bye.